I was sitting at my kitchen table on a gray Tuesday morning in November, staring at a hydro bill I already knew I couldn't pay. The coffee in my mug had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, the first real snow of the season was coming down over the backyard, the same backyard where I'd taught my son Daniel to skate on the rink I flooded every January for 20 years. I looked at that bill, $43, and I thought about calling him to ask for help. Then I remembered what happened the last time I asked. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with a firm in Calgary, and before I retired, I helped design 3 of the highway interchanges you probably drive through without thinking twice. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you, so you understand what kind of man I am. Methodical, patient. Someone who reads the blueprints 3 times before he picks up a single tool. My wife Carol was the same way. We met at the University of Alberta in 1979, married in '82, and spent the next 4 decades building something together. Not just a family, a life with real foundations. When Daniel was born, Carol went back to school part-time and became a chartered accountant. She was sharper with numbers than anyone I've ever known. We weren't flashy people. We drove reasonable cars. We bought groceries on sale. We took one good vacation a year. But quietly, carefully, over 35 years, Carol and I had built something most people never see coming from the outside. The farmhouse in Foothills County that Carol inherited from her father, we'd fixed it up over the years and rented it out since 2003. The duplex in Red Deer that we bought in 1998 for $147,000 and was now worth 11 times that. The investment portfolio Carol managed herself, tucked inside RRSPs and TFSAs, rebalanced every quarter. And the house Daniel and his wife lived in, the one in a quiet cul-de-sac in Airdrie, which I had bought outright in 2018, as what I thought was a gesture of love. I put it in a family trust. I thought it meant we were bound together. I didn't understand yet what my daughter-in-law, Renee, actually thought it meant. I met Renee at Daniel's apartment in the spring of 2019. She was polished in a way that made me uneasy from the first handshake, not unfriendly exactly, but calculated. The kind of smile that was performing rather than feeling. Carol leaned over to me in the car afterward and said, quietly, "She asked about your retirement 3 times in 2 hours. I told Carol she was being unfair. I told myself the same thing for the next 5 years. They got married in the summer of 2020, a small ceremony because of the pandemic, and by the following year, Renee had given up her job at the marketing firm she'd worked at and settled into what she called managing the household. Daniel was doing well. He'd moved into software sales and was making good money, but the lifestyle they built together seemed to expand faster than their income ever could have justified. Vacations to Mexico and Portugal, a new truck every 3 years. Memberships at a golf club in Cochrane that cost more annually than my first car. None of that was my business. I kept my distance. Carol and I had our own life. Then Carol got sick. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March of 2022. By the following February, she was gone. 11 months. I don't have adequate words for what that year was like, and I won't try to find them here. What I will say is that Daniel came to visit 4 times during those 11 months, each visit shorter than the last. Renee came twice. The second time, she asked Carol, who was on a hospital bed we'd rented for the living room, whether she'd updated her will recently. Carol looked at me across the room. She didn't answer. I changed the subject. After Carol passed, something shifted in the way Daniel and Renee treated me. The calls became less frequent. The invitations to family dinners dried up. When I did see them, there was a new tone, a kind of barely concealed impatience, as if I were a task they needed to get through. Renee began referring to my house, the one I'd owned for 26 years and paid off in full as the old place. She said it the way you'd describe something you were embarrassed by. 6 months after Carol died, Daniel sat me down in their kitchen and told me that they'd been talking, and they were worried about me. Living alone, the drive from my place to theirs. He said it would make more sense, financially and practically, if I moved in with them. They had the space, he said. The basement was finished. I could be closer to them. I want to be honest with you. Part of me was touched. I was lonely. I missed Carol every single morning. I said yes. I understand now that I made that decision with my grief and not my blueprints. Within 3 months, I had become something between a handyman and a ghost. I fixed the fence. I repainted the garage. I shoveled the driveway every snowfall without being asked because I needed to feel useful. When Daniel traveled for work, I was there to receive deliveries, watch the dog, wait for the furnace repair guy. I didn't mind any of it, honestly. I needed to feel needed. What I minded was the other part. The money conversation started slowly. Daniel mentioned, almost casually, that they were a little tight that month, a big credit card bill, something about the truck payment, and could I help cover groceries for the next few weeks. I gave him $300. A month later, Renee mentioned, very warmly, that they'd found a bathroom renovation they loved, and wouldn't it be wonderful to update the house? I didn't respond to that one. She brought it up again 2 weeks later, less warmly. I said I'd think about it. By the second year, I had transferred just over $40,000 in various amounts to Daniel's account. I had paid for 2 flights to Toronto for them. I had quietly covered the property tax on the Airdrie house, which was, I'll remind you, technically still mine because Daniel told me he was short that quarter. Each time I told myself it was temporary. Each time I felt the slow erosion of something I couldn't name. I want to tell you about a Thursday evening in September of last year. I came upstairs from the basement to let them know I'd made dinner a pot of chicken soup, Carol's recipe, the one I still make when I miss her most. Renee was on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't hear me come up. I caught maybe 15 seconds of the conversation before she noticed me. She was talking to someone, her sister, I think, and she said, "Clear as anything. He's sitting on a gold mine and acts like he's got nothing." Honestly, at this point, I just need to know what we're actually going to get. She turned and saw me standing in the doorway. She hung up without saying goodbye. We looked at each other for a long moment. Then she smiled that performed smile and said, "Oh, Walter, something smells wonderful." I went back downstairs and sat on the edge of the bed Carol and I used to share at the farmhouse, which was now in a storage unit because there was no room for it here, and I made a decision. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and she has handled my family's affairs for 18 years. I told her I needed to review every document related to the Airdrie property, the trust structure, and the rental properties. I told her I wanted to understand exactly what my exposure was if things changed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Walter, I've been hoping you'd call." Over the following 3 months, I became very organized. I've always been organized. 31 years of engineering does that. But this was different. I moved carefully. I didn't change anything visible. I still came upstairs for dinner. I still shoveled the driveway. I still let Daniel talk to me about his sales targets while Renee scrolled through her phone across the table. I listened. I watched. I took notes in a small green notebook that I kept in my jacket pocket. What I found, once Patricia and I went through everything carefully, was that the trust I'd set up for the Airdrie house had a specific provision I'd included on the advice of my accountant back in 2018. The property reverted fully to me, with no encumbrance, if the beneficiary relationship changed, which, under the terms I'd written, included a documented breakdown of the familial arrangement. Patricia told me that what I was describing, the financial transfers made under informal pressure, the living situation, the conversation I'd overheard, was enough to document that breakdown clearly. I also discovered, reviewing Carol's estate documents, that her RRSP, which had rolled into my RRIF at her passing, had grown to a balance that made me sit quietly in Patricia's office for almost a full minute. Carol had been rebalancing that account every quarter for 22 years. I had not looked at it since before she got sick. I was, between the properties and the portfolio and the remaining equity on the Red Deer duplex, sitting on a net worth just north of $2.3 million. And I was living in a basement, giving my son money for groceries. December came. Daniel's 40th birthday was the 15th. And Renee had organized a dinner party with 8 of their friends at a restaurant in downtown Calgary. A nice place, the kind with a prefix menu and a wine list that assumes you're not looking at the right column. She mentioned a few days before that it would be a lovely gesture if I covered the dinner. For the whole table. She said it the way she said most things she wanted, framed as an obvious conclusion, as if the only question was whether I'd be gracious enough to confirm it. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said. Then I told Renee I'd been a little short lately, and didn't think I could manage it. The look on her face was the first genuinely unguarded thing I'd seen from her in 2 years. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. She said, "Walter, you're not actually poor. We all know that." I said, "Renee, I'm not sure what you mean." She said, "You have properties. You have investments." Daniel told me what Carol's RRSP was worth when she passed. There it was. I said, "Daniel doesn't actually know what Carol's RRSP was worth, and neither do you." She stared at me. Then she said, with a patience that wasn't patient at all, "We've been supporting you for 2 years. We've had you living here. We've included you in everything. And you sit there while we struggle, and you won't even—" I held up my hand. I said, "I'd like to talk to Daniel about this." Daniel, to his partial credit, looked uncomfortable when Renee explained the conversation to him. But he didn't disagree with her. He sat there at their kitchen table and he looked at his hands and he said, "Dad, it would help. You have more than you need. We're family." I looked at my son. I thought about the skating rink in the backyard. I thought about the drives to hockey practice in the dark at 5:30 in the morning. Carol handing me a travel mug of coffee without a word. I thought about what we'd built and why. And I thought about a Tuesday morning in November with a cold cup of coffee and a $43 hydro bill. I said, "Let me think about it." They thought that was a concession. It wasn't. I called Patricia the following Monday. I told her to begin the process of formally terminating the family trust on the Airdrie property and reverting it to my sole ownership. She told me the process would take approximately 60 days and that Daniel would receive a registered notice. I told her to proceed. Then I called the property management company that looked after the Red Deer duplex and told them I'd be selling. I wanted a market assessment by the end of the month. The next part I want to be careful about because it matters. I didn't do this out of anger. I had moved past anger somewhere around the 3rd week of December, sitting in my basement listening to Renee on the phone with her mother, describing a ski trip to Whistler she was planning for February. I had moved past anger into something colder and clearer, call it an engineer's precision. I was looking at the blueprints. I was reading them correctly this time. In January, I found a 1-bedroom condo in a building in southwest Calgary, one of those newer ones, with a gym and a concierge, and a view of the mountains on clear days. The building happened to be managed by a company that was 40% owned by a holding company that was, in a roundabout way that I won't detail here, mine. The monthly fee was comfortable. I put down a deposit. I did not tell Daniel or Renee. I spent 3 weeks quietly moving things. The green notebook, Carol's photographs, the books I'd had since university, a box of tools, the things that were actually mine, the things that were actually Walter. I moved in the back of my truck in small loads on weekday mornings when they were both out. The registered notice arrived at the Airdrie house on a Wednesday in late February. Patricia told me it would. I was already gone by then. I'd moved the last of my things out on the Sunday, left my key on the kitchen counter, and driven away while the street was still quiet. I didn't leave a note. I didn't call. I just left. Daniel called my cell phone 11 times that Wednesday. I answered on the 12th. He was not calm. He said the notice made no sense, that there had to be a mistake, that I couldn't just— I let him talk until he ran out of momentum. Then I said, "Daniel, the property always belonged to me." The trust was a gesture. Gestures can be withdrawn. He said, "Where are you? Where are your things?" I said, "I've moved into my own place." Silence. He said, She's very upset." I said, "I imagine she is." He said, "Dad, this is you can't." And then he stopped, and I heard something shift in his voice, something younger. And he said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "Daniel, I've been trying to tell you things for 2 years. You and Renee had a different conversation than the one I was trying to have." He didn't answer that. I told him the Airdrie house would go to market in the spring unless he wanted to purchase it from me at fair market value. I told him Patricia would be in touch with the details. I told him I hoped he was well. Then I said goodbye and ended the call. I want to tell you about my condo, because that part matters too. It's on the 14th floor. The kitchen faces west, and in the evenings, when the light comes in at a low angle over the Rockies, it's the kind of thing that Carol would have stood at the window looking at for a long time without saying anything. I've started cooking again, really cooking, not just heating things. I made her chicken soup last Sunday. I stood at the window while it simmered, and I talked to her a little. I do that sometimes. I've rejoined the hiking club I'd belonged to in my 50s, before everything got complicated. I've been out twice to the Kananaskis trails. My knees aren't what they were, but the cold air still works the same way it always has. It clears everything. I've had coffee 3 times now with a man named Gordon from the hiking club, a retired teacher who lost his wife 4 years ago. We don't talk about our wives directly, but we don't avoid it either. It's a comfortable thing to have found. In March, I made a donation to the Tom Baker Cancer Center in Carol's name. It wasn't performative. It wasn't large enough to be flashy. It was the kind of thing Carol would have done herself if the situation were reversed. And doing it made me feel, for a few hours, that I was still operating within the life we had designed together. Daniel has called 3 more times since February. The first call was angry. The second was confused. The third, which came last week, was the one I'd been waiting for. He called on a Sunday evening, and he didn't start with the property, or the trust, or the market value. He started by asking how I was, and there was something in the way he asked it, something that reminded me of when he was 12, and had done something he knew was wrong, and was trying to find the way back. Not quite an apology. Not yet. But the beginning of one. I told him I was well. I told him the view from my building was something he should see sometime. I told him I'd been hiking again. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I didn't handle this the right way, Dad. A lot of it." I said, "No, you didn't." He said, "Renee and I have been talking." I didn't ask what they'd been talking about. I waited. He said, "I think I let things get sideways. I think I made assumptions about you, and about what was owed. And I don't think I was." He stopped. Started again. "I wasn't treating you like my father." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, "Daniel, your mother and I spent 35 years building something. It wasn't for us. It was always meant to eventually become yours. But the way it comes to you matters. It can't be taken. It has to be inherited. Do you understand the difference?" He said quietly, "Yeah, Dad. I think I'm starting to." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Hockey. The weather in Calgary. The fact that his truck needed work. At the end, he asked if he could come see the condo sometime. I said yes. I don't know what comes next between Daniel and me. I'm 67 years old, and I've learned not to build on assumptions. I'll wait and see what the foundation actually looks like before I decide what to put on top of it. Carol would tell me to be patient. She'd also tell me not to be a pushover about it. I'm trying to find the balance. I'm still reading the blueprints. What I know is this. I'm sleeping through the night for the first time in 2 years. I'm eating well. I'm watching the mountains in the evening light. And I'm living inside a life I designed for myself. Not a life I was slowly being redesigned to fit inside. Carol used to say that the best structures are the ones that look simple from the outside. All the real work is in what you can't see. 35 years, 2 rental properties, a riff that still surprises me when I look at it, and a man who finally remembered which direction the blueprints were supposed to face. I raised my coffee this morning hot, this time toward the window and the mountains, and I thought, this is what she would have wanted. Not the money, not the properties. This. A Tuesday morning with hot coffee and a clear view, and no one deciding who I am for me. That's the whole of it.